Why did God set up the animal sacrifices of the Old Testament if he knew in advance they would not accomplish the intended purpose and he would have to send Jesus? Why did God do the animal sacrifices of the Old Testament if he knew in advance they would not accomplish their purpose? Brandy?
You did this to me last time. Andy?
No, that's true. I did it to you last time. I could at least jump in. It's like, well, there have been, I might think of it this way. There have been multiple covenants within Scripture. So there's the covenant of the land, and then there's the covenant of the law, and then there's the covenant of, that the prophets bring back the kingdom, and then there's the covenant of Jesus. So there are various covenants. So God has tried a few things to try to get our attention. And so, why did God do that? In hopes that we might choose well, I'd say the answer. And then, how far to the fringe do we want to go?
Go there.
Oh,
I
don't know where you're going.
Right?
Sure, Andy, go over the cliff. Just go over it. Well, I think it's up in the air as to whether the covenant of Jesus has worked.
Oh, I didn't know you were
Oh,
going
I didn't know
there.
you were going to go there.
I don't think I can hang out.
I mean, it is. And so it's Jesus' kingdom is still being built. It is still unfinished. It is still a work in progress. And what the animal sacrifices as well as the other covenants show is there comes a point where God just kind of looked at what was happening and said, we've got to go a different way. And that's the scriptural witness. Now, I want to believe with all my heart that Jesus is the last word. But I think we also have to think about the response that we are offering to it. Now, I will say, in terms of the animal sacrifices specifically, I think Christ on the cross means that the animal sacrifices were no longer necessary. Christ is the ultimate sacrifice. He is the ultimate victory, and there's just no need to go about that anymore. So that is why the animal sacrifices ended. But I think the deeper question they're trying to ask is, does God change strategies? So what do you think?
I heard you. You go right ahead.
I'm not going to jump off the bridge with you, because
No.
that feels a little further than I want to go. Because I do think that Jesus is the last word, and I don't have any questions about that.
I do too.
But I do, so I wonder if animal sacrifices, God meets us where we are. If you think about other religions at the time and think about the ways that they are interacting with their gods, that the animal sacrifices would have made sense to the Hebrew people as a way to interact with their deity. And so God meets us where we are. And as much as I don't know that we can ever really comprehend Jesus, I think that it's one of the ways that that God moves through time. I don't think it's that God introduced animal sacrifices and then had to change course or something like that. I mean, I do think that there's a little bit of that. But.
Well, there's a constant, and then there's a strategy. Yes, I'd say like God's love, our need for forgiveness. These things are constant, and the way they're expressed, I think your point is to say may take on the shape of the culture of the time.
Yes, that was what I was going for.
Okay.
Yes. So I would second the God meets us where we're at. And it sounded like, to me, you may have been referencing Rob Bell's latest book, which that will be my fringe statement for the day. But Rob Bell, in his book, What is the Bible, has a very interesting beginning point, and it is really essentially that. He goes and does the historical work of looking at what was happening at the time when Abraham is asked to sacrifice Isaac, and really unpacks what is sacrifice in that culture and time. And then also, he goes on to talk about how it's important for us to remember that Scripture is, from what the record we have, is primarily humans' interpretation of what their interactions with the divine are. So it is often reflecting what human consciousness is capable of narrating at that point in human history. And yes, it's this complicated gift from God, and it's also a very human book. And I think that, does God need to change his strategy? I don't know. I think that knowing that humans grow and humans progress, I think that God has this overarching, unfolding narrative that meets us where we're at when we're there. So I think that Jesus' sacrifice doesn't make sense intellectually to us without this coming first.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
All right.
But then the only other thing I'll say is I don't love why God questions, because I really don't know. I mean, anytime it says, Pastor, why God? It doesn't matter what follows after it. I'm like, your guess is probably as good as mine.
Yeah.
Because who knows the mind of God? I mean, If God if God is truly worth worshiping, then there has to be space for mystery, because no single one of us can fully know the mind of God, and I think that's a gift.
I think that's a
Frustrating
great
at
point.
times.
It's like we talked a little bit about this earlier in the sense that, we are in the same servant kingdom you are. So it's, the same prayers, the same ideas, the same scripture. Those are the ones that you have, we have. And sometimes we have to remember that God has a much bigger scope of things than we do.